This next game comes from back in 2002 with a very young 15-year-old Teimour Radjabov playing the white pieces against Viswanathan Anand. The game is from a FIDE Grand Prix, and it's actually a rapid game, which leads to some inaccurate play from both players. In fact, Anand didn't include this game in his best games collection, and I'm not too surprised, but the finish is so aesthetic and appealing to me that I couldn't omit it from this video series. We're going to move relatively quickly through the opening phase in this game. Both players play very reasonable normal moves in a Queen's Indian defense. The position is pretty balanced, and then over here on move 13, after white's move Queen e2, we get an interesting decision from Viswanathan Anand. He plays the tactical move pawn to c4. There are many feasible moves in this position, so this forcing choice isn't necessary. After bishop takes c4, he plays the move bishop takes e4. Now, if Radjabov goes ahead and captures on e4 with the queen, this is fantastic for Anand. After rook takes c4, this bishop here on b2 is bad. This pawn is blockaded. There's going to be good pressure on the c-file. Maybe I'm exaggerating how much I like black here, but I would rather play black, and this is exactly the kind of thing that Anand is hoping to achieve after his move pawn to c4. However, there is an intermediate move in this position. Bishop a6 is played, saving the bishop, and after bishop takes f3, forced to avoid losing material, queen takes f3. Now Radjabov has the bishop pair and a much more mobile set of hanging pawns in the center. So this is a very advantageous position for Radjabov in this case. Anand's tactics have backfired, and he's going to have to kind of play catch up, if you will, in this position. So we get some more kind of developing and improving moves from both players. Anand tries to freeze the pawns in place, and after another pair of moves, Radjabov chips away at the blockade that Anand is trying to establish with the move pawn to a4. Now, due to this pressure here and the weakness of these pawns, Anand needs to take a slightly radical decision and take on a4 here. Now, this means that the hanging pawns for white are free to advance again. They're no longer blockaded. And Anand, even if he is maybe kind of winning a pawn, has doubled a pawns that don't look now like they could be strong. However, we should acknowledge that with this capture on a4, Anand does get access to some open lines on the queen side and some more scope for his pieces. I think that Radjabov's chances should be favored here, but this is something that Anand has to work with on the queen side. Notice that if bishop takes a6 here, the move queen a8 would force the queens off and give black a decent set of activity on the queen side. White is actually playing for kingside activity with his bishop pair and pressure on the king side, so a queen trade is in Anand's interest at this point. So, after pawn takes a4, pawn c4, getting these hanging pawns rolling, Anand plays the move queen to b8, bishop a1. We get rook to d8, rook e4, a threatening rook lift from Radjabov. Knight f6 attacking the rook, rook h4, creating a ton of pressure on that black king side, bishop e7. This is a good point to pause the video and ask yourself, if you were playing white, what would you play to continue the attack most decisively? So, in this position, the natural and strong move is pawn to d5. So, after pawn d5, we're opening up this bishop, and we're immediately threatening bishop takes f6, and then bishop or rook takes on h7 with a very, very strong attack. There's also ideas of queen h5, queen h3, there's pressure on e6. This is exactly what you want to do when you have hanging pawns or an isolated pawn. The d5 break here is incredibly thematic. In these kinds of positions, it should be the first thing you consider. It's hard for me to know why Radjabov rejected this move in this position. The move knight takes d5 is not an effective response. Even though the rook is attacked here on h4, white can take on h7 with the bishop or the rook. Rook takes h7 actually seems to be the stronger move when there's an immediate threat here, and queen h5 is also pretty much mating, and knight f6 runs into queen h3, threatening mate on h8. This is just over. In fact, mate is forced in this position, and there wasn't much better available to black. If d5, the best defense would seem to be rook over to d7 in this position. And then there are many attacking continuations. For example, queen h3 piling up further pressure here on the h-file looks really good. But to be fair, as good as this looks for white, and as much as I think Radjabov should have gone for it, there is some defensive resource available for black. This is not completely over. There is no forced mate in this line that I can see. So after bishop e7, Radjabov instead played rook h3, moving the rook out of the way of potential attacks from the bishop, trying to continue the attack a little more slowly. Now, pawn h6 is played from Anand, and Radjabov plays the move rook b1, trying to take control of the b file. If he succeeds in that, of course, he would have kind of control over the entire board. However, this move was a significant mistake, but it takes a spectacular move to prove it so. Pause your videos and try to figure out what Anand played in this position. The move that Anand found is the spectacular rook take c4. This is a back rank trick, but it doesn't lead to back rank mate, more a kind of back rank just complete domination. So at this point, after rook takes c4, the bishop cannot take, because then the rook on b1 would simply be hanging. So we must accept the sacrificed queen. Rook takes b8. Now rook c1 check happens. This isn't a back rank mate because the bishop can retreat to f1. But after rook takes b8, even though at this moment Anand only has a rook for the queen, he is threatening simply rook takes a1. He's more importantly threatening rook down to b1. He's going to be threatening mates here, and he still has a passed a pawn. The following sequence of moves seems relatively forced to avoid immediate material loss. The bishop moves to c3. The rook comes into b1, threatening mate, and the queen defends on d3. It's too early, and we're down too much material for us to take here, because after a series of exchanges on f1, we'll still be down material and our a pawn will be blockaded. However, even if we can't cash in right away, we can simply push our pawns. White is completely tied down here. The rook swinging over with the rook lift was really a strong idea, and if d5 had been played earlier when we talked about it, this rook might have been a heroic attacking piece that could have led to victory for Radjabov. But as soon as the attack is slightly misplayed and he walks into this back rank trap set by Anand, the rook ends up being a mere bystander, and the rest of the pieces are totally tied down, trying to fend off the pressure from the rooks. The pawn simply advances to a3. For lack of a better move, Radjabov takes this pawn on a6, and the move a2 is played. Of course, queen takes allows mate in 1. So instead, Radjabov plays pawn to g4. It's already possible to queen here and to beat up material, but there's even better now. Anand finishes incisively and with style by playing rook takes f1, queen takes f1, knight e4, attacking the bishop that is also helping to defend against promotion, and after bishop a1, knight d2 is simply game over. Everything is under attack for white. If you take, of course, we're going to get to make a new queen and mate very, very shortly. And white is losing basically the house at this point. The queen on f1, the bishop on a1, new stuff is queening. It's a complete disaster at this point in the game, and Radjabov rightly surrendered at this point, resigning the position. I think this is a really beautiful game. It's a rapid game, so it's not as good in some sense or as perfect in some sense as some of the other games that we've looked at, but there are many instructive themes to take away from this, and the finish is too aesthetic to not include in this video series for me. I hope you've enjoyed the series. If so, please subscribe, and please share this with a friend who you think might also enjoy it.